The
Get out
air
of
in
my
the grand
sight!
ballroom of the Moonstone Pack's mansion was a palpable
I
entity,
am
a
here
thick
today to
mixture
discuss
of
the
rare
acquisition of
perfumes,
your
old
company.
money, and the sharp, metallic tang of latent power. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto a sea of silk, diamonds, and carefully curated smiles. I moved through it all like a ghost, a specter in a threadbare black dress that marked me as part of the serving staff. My name is Elara, and in the rigid hierarchy of our world, I was an omega, the lowest rank. My presence was meant to be functional and invisible, a directive I had spent a lifetime perfecting. Tonight's opulence was for him. Lucian Blackwood, alpha of the most powerful pack on the eastern seaboard, billionaire CEO, and according to the whispered gossip swirling faster than the champagne in my flute, a man in search of a wife. His father's will had stipulated it: mate before 30 or lose the majority stake in his empire. It was a society column fairy tale, a transaction disguised as destiny. I kept my head down, my tray a shield, my gaze fixed on the polished marble floor. His world of legacy and luxury was a galaxy away from my own, a life of quiet struggle and family debts that kept me tethered to this servitude. Then the atmosphere changed. The hum of conversation dipped, then surged with a new, eager energy. He had arrived. I didn't need to look up to feel it. His power preceded him, a wave of pure dominance that made the air itself seem to still and bow. From beneath my lashes, I saw him. Lucian Blackwood was every bit the king they proclaimed him to be. Tall and broad-shouldered, he moved with a predator's grace that his impeccably tailored suit could not conceal. His hair was the color of polished obsidian, his features sharp and severe, carved from marble and devoid of warmth. His eyes, a stormy gray, scanned the room as if assessing a balance sheet, looking for the most valuable asset. A sudden jostle from a tipsy socialite sent me stumbling forward. My tray flew from my hands, its cargo of crystal glasses shattering on the floor with a sound like gunfire. The music faltered. A ring of silence expanded around me, and I found myself sprawled at the feet of Lucian Blackwood. Mortification burned my cheeks. I scrambled to gather the shards, my hands trembling. A strong, elegant hand entered my field of vision, not to help, but to halt my movements. I froze, compelled by a force I could not name. I slowly lifted my gaze to meet his. Time stopped. The gray of his eyes was not cold up close. It was a tempest, a vortex, and in its depths, I saw my own shock reflected. A current, raw and electric, arced between us. The ballroom, the guests, the noise, it all melted into a distant hum. My wolf, a quiet and submissive creature I had learned to suppress, surged to the surface with a force that stole my breath. She howled a single, triumphant word inside my soul: mate. I saw the same primal recognition in his eyes, a flicker of wonder, of awe, a crack in his icy facade. For one breathtaking heartbeat, I dared to believe in the fairy tale. Then, the shutters came down. The wonder was extinguished, replaced by a dawning horror that curdled into pure, unadulterated disgust. He snatched his hand back as if my skin had burned him. He took a deliberate step backward, creating a chasm between us. His lip curled. You. The word was not a question but an accusation, spoken to the room, not to me. An omega? A servant? He made my title sound like a vile obscenity. A cruel, mocking laugh escaped him, devoid of any real humor. My wolf is clearly mistaken. This is some desperate trick. There is no bond here. The words were a physical blow. I felt it, a searing, white-hot pain in the center of my chest, as if a thread of starlight connecting us had been viciously snapped. The air rushed from my lungs. My wolf's triumphant howl turned into a whimper of agony before she retreated into a dark, silent corner of my being. Broken, he turned to his beta, his voice dripping with a contempt that froze the very blood in my veins. Get this creature out of my sight. The stench of desperation is overwhelming. Tears of sheer, soul-deep humiliation welled in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I would not give him that. Rough hands, the security staff gripped my arms and hauled me to my feet. I was dragged away, a piece of discarded rubbish, through a crowd of staring, pitying, and mocking faces. The whispers began again, this time about me. The delusional omega, the punchline to a joke I never meant to tell. The last thing I saw before being ejected into the cold night was Lucian Blackwood turning his back on me, already moving on, the inconvenient interruption erased from his perfect world. The pain of the rejection was an open wound, but a cold, hard resolve began to form around it. That night, as I walked away from the mansion's blinding lights, I left Elara the Omega behind. He had annihilated her. What would emerge from the ashes was a question for the dawn. The days that followed the gala were a blur of a pain so profound it felt physical. It was a constant, aching hollow in my chest, a phantom limb where a glorious new connection had briefly flourished before being brutally severed. The world had lost its color, its scent, its taste. Food was ash. The sun's warmth could not penetrate the chill that had settled deep into my bones. I was a shell, moving through the motions of a life that no longer felt like my own. The whispered rumors had spread through the pack like a virus, and every glance in my direction, whether pitying or scornful, was a fresh lash upon my raw spirit. I was the rejected one, a living cautionary tale. My wolf was silent. Her absence was a void more deafening than any noise. The vibrant, pulsing part of my soul that had recognized its other half was now a closed-off, desolate place. I would lie in my small bed in the cramped quarters allotted to Omegas, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, and feel the echo of that snap, that moment of exquisite annihilation. Lucian Blackwood's face, twisted in disgust, was etched on the back of my eyelids. His words played on a loop. Creature, stench, desperation. They were branding irons on my soul. But then, something shifted. The all-consuming grief began to curdle into a different, hotter emotion. Anger. It was a small spark at first, a defiant flicker in the vast darkness of my despair. He had looked at me and seen nothing but a title. He had not seen the person, the mind, the will that resided within this Omega shell. His rejection was not of a flawed connection. It was of an idea, a social standing he deemed unworthy. The injustice of it, the sheer arrogance, began to burn away the paralyzing sadness. I made a decision one rain-swept night, watching the water trace paths down my window. I would not wither away as a monument to his cruelty. I would not spend my life as a ghost in this pack, forever defined by his scorn. If I was to be free of this pain, I had to be free of everything. Leaving the Moonstone pack was an act of sheer will. It meant turning my back on the only home I had ever known, on the few TIs I had, however strained. It meant stepping into a world utterly unknown, a human world where the words Alpha and Omega held no power. It was terrifying. It was also the most liberating feeling I had ever experienced. The city I chose was large, anonymous, a concrete forest where I could get lost. The first months were a struggle for survival. I took a small, dingy apartment that smelled of stale cigarettes and hope. I found work as a waitress, my hands chapped from soapy water, my feet aching from long shifts. The physical exhaustion was a blessing. It quieted the mind. It gave the pain no room to breathe. During the day I served fries and coffee, but at night, I began to reclaim myself. I had always had a mind for patterns, for systems, for the logical language of computers. It was a skill deemed unimportant for an Omega, but it was mine. I saved every spare penny and bought a second-hand laptop. I spent my few free hours in public libraries, consuming every piece of coding knowledge I could find online, teaching myself the languages that built the modern world. It was a different kind of magic, one based on reason and creation, not birthright and destruction. The journey was slow. There were setbacks, moments of despair where the old wounds would throb and the bed seemed too comfortable to leave. But I persisted. The memory of that ballroom, of the feel of every eye upon me, was a fuel more potent than any coffee. I was building a fortress around myself, brick by digital brick. Years passed. The scared, hurting Omega faded, replaced by a woman of quiet determination. My skills grew. I transitioned from a waitress to a freelance coder, taking on small projects. The work was challenging and fulfilling. I was building something. I was solving problems. I was valued for my output, for the sharpness of my mind, not dismissed for the rank of my wolf. I started my own tiny company, a one-woman operation focused on cybersecurity. It was my answer to a world that had made me feel vulnerable. I would create systems that protected, that fortified, that could not be so easily breached. The business grew slowly, organically, built on a foundation of competence and relentless work. I rarely thought of him. When I did, the sharp, stabbing pain was gone. In its place was a distant, almost analytical curiosity. The bond was not gone, not entirely. It was a faint, silent thread in the tapestry of my soul, a whisper of what might have been. but it no longer controlled me. It was a footnote in my history, not the definition of my future. I had been forged in the fire of his rejection. The girl who had been thrown away was gone. In her place stood Elara, a woman who belonged to herself. I had built a life, a good one, with my own hands. I was not waiting for a mate to complete me. I was already whole. The city had become my sanctuary, a symphony of anonymous noise that drowned out the silent judgments of my past. My life, once defined by its lack of choices, was now a tapestry I had woven myself, thread by careful thread. My small tech firm, Aegis Solutions, operated out of a modest but sunlit office, a world away from the oppressive grandeur of Pack Estates. Here, the only hierarchy was merit, and the only scent in the air was coffee and ambition. It was on a Tuesday, with the afternoon light stretching long across my desk, that the email arrived. It was crisp, professional, and bore the distinctive logo of Blackwood Industries' venture capital arm. My breath caught, a purely instinctual reaction to a name I had tried to relegate to history. They had seen my proposal for a new innovative security protocol. My work had been noticed, and they were interested, deeply interested. They requested a formal presentation at their corporate headquarters. The irony was so profound it was almost laughable. The universe, it seemed, had a twisted sense of humor. My first impulse was to delete it, to shield the life I had built from any ghost that might threaten it. But that impulse was quickly followed by a surge of defiant pride. Why should I run? This was not about the rejected Omega and the arrogant Alpha. This was about Elara, the CEO of Aegis Solutions, and Lucian Blackwood, the head of a multinational corporation. He had evaluated my company based on its merits, and those merits were substantial. I would walk into his kingdom, not as a supplicant, but as an equal. I would face him across a boardroom table, not a ballroom floor. The day of the meeting arrived. I dressed with deliberate care, selecting a tailored pantsuit of deep charcoal gray. It was armor, professional and impeccable. My hair was swept back, my makeup minimal and sharp. I looked in the mirror and saw a capable, confident woman. The reflection bore no resemblance to the girl in the maid's uniform. Blackwood Industries' headquarters was a monument to glass and steel, a soaring edifice of cold, modern power. The air inside was hushed, smelling of polished metal and expensive air conditioning. I was led by a silent assistant into a conference room that seemed to hover above the city. The view was breathtaking, a panorama of dominion. I took my seat at the vast mahogany table, placing my tablet before me. My heart was a steady, determined drumbeat. I would not be intimidated by his world anymore. I owned my place at this table. The other executives filed in, a murmur of polite introductions. And then he entered, Lucian Blackwood. Time did not stop as it had before. Instead, it seemed to slow, each second stretching to accommodate the detailed observation my mind began to perform. 2 years had etched themselves upon him. He was still devastatingly handsome, but the cold arrogance had been tempered by a new gravity. He looked older, wearier. There were faint lines of tension around his stormy eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and immense pressure. He carried his power like a heavy crown now, not a casually worn accessory. He took his seat at the head of the table without looking at me, his attention on the documents before him. He was a king holding court, and I was merely the next item on his agenda. The presentation began. My voice was clear, calibrated to project authority and passion for my work. I spoke of firewalls and encryption, of threat analysis and predictive algorithms. I was in my element, and it showed. I commanded the room's attention, guiding them through the complexities of my system with ease. It was halfway through, as I was explaining a particularly elegant line of code, that I saw it. A slight tremor in his hand, then a stillness so complete it was more alarming than any movement. His head, which had been bowed over his papers, slowly lifted. His gray eyes, those stormy pools that had once looked at me with such contempt, now locked onto me with an intensity that was almost violent. He was not seeing the CEO. He was not hearing about firewalls. His nostrils flared just slightly. A purely animalistic gesture. The scent he had once dismissed as the stench of desperation was now something entirely different. It was layered with the crispness of confidence, the warm tone of hard-won success, the sharp, clean aroma of intellect and resolve. It was the scent of his true mate, refined and perfected by adversity. It was utterly intoxicating, I watched the realization detonate behind his eyes. It was not a dawning awareness. It was a cataclysm. The color drained from his face. The impeccable mask of the unflappable billionaire shattered, revealing a man completely and utterly blindsided. His pen slipped from his suddenly slack fingers, clattering against the polished wood of the table. The sound was deafening in the sudden silence. The other executives shifted uncomfortably, sensing the seismic shift in the room's energy but unable to comprehend its source. I held his shattered gaze, my own expression neutral, professional. I finished my sentence without a single waver in my tone. "Any questions, Mr. Blackwood?" I asked, my voice cool and measured, the perfect echo of a business professional concluding her pitch. The meeting ended in a blur of muffled thanks and hurried exits. He remained seated, statue still, his eyes following me as I gathered my things. I did not look back. I walked out of that conference room with my head high, the taste of a strange, quiet victory on my tongue. The game had changed. The board had been reset, and for the first time, I held all the pieces. The silence in the wake of my departure from the conference room was a tangible thing, a vacuum waiting to be filled. I had barely returned to the sanctity of my sunlit office, my hands still faintly trembling from the charged encounter, when my personal phone lit up with a number I did not recognize. Yet I knew the call was an inevitability, a gravitational pull I had felt the moment our eyes met across that mahogany table. His voice on the line was a low, strained vibration, stripped of all its corporate authority. He requested, he did not demand, my presence in his private office. Now, I agreed. This was a conversation years in the making, and I would not shy away from it. His private office was not what I expected. It was not a cold, modern space of chrome and glass, but a library. Floor-to-ceiling shelves groaned under the weight of leather-bound volumes. A large ancient desk stood as an island in a sea of rich Persian rug. The air smelled of old paper, polished wood, and a faint, lingering trace of his scent, that intoxicating blend of storm and forest that now called to my soul with a renewed, painful intensity. He stood by the vast window, his back to me, his silhouette outlined against the sprawling city skyline. He did not turn immediately. When he finally did, the man who faced me was a stranger. The imposing Alpha, the billionaire titan, was gone. In his place stood a man hollowed out by regret. His face was pale, his usually impeccable posture slumped with a weight that seemed almost physical. His stormy eyes, when they met mine, were windows into a 2-year-long winter. Elara, my name on his lips was a prayer and a condemnation. It was the first time he had ever spoken it. He did not approach me. He simply stood there exposed. "I felt it the moment you left the room," he began, his voice raw, abraded. "The emptiness I have carried for 2 years, it suddenly had a shape. It had a name. It was you. It has always been you." He took a single, shaky step forward, his hand gesturing vaguely around the opulent room, a gesture that encompassed his entire empire. "All of this, it is a gilded cage. I have sat in this chair every day since you left, surrounded by everything I was told mattered, and I have felt nothing. A profound, deafening nothing. I thought my wolf was broken. I thought I was broken." He finally closed the distance between us, not with dominance, but with a devastating vulnerability. He sank to his knees before me, the mighty Alpha brought low. The sight was so shocking it stole the air from my lungs. "I was a fool," he whispered, the words laced with a self-loathing so deep it was painful to witness. "A blind, arrogant fool, raised to believe a mate was a transaction, a merging of power and bloodlines. I saw your rank, not your soul. I rejected the only genuine thing that has ever been offered to me in this entire cursed life." He looked up, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "That night, I went home, and I felt the bond snap. I told myself it was for the best, but a part of me knew. A part of me died with it. These past 2 years have been a penance I designed for myself without even realizing it." He reached out, but stopped short of touching me, his hand hovering in the air between us as if I were a mirage he feared would disappear. "The bond is still there, isn't it? Faint, like a scar, but it is there. I can feel it now, a thread of light in all that darkness. Please." His voice broke on the word. "Please, you owe me nothing. I deserve your hatred. I deserve your scorn, but I am begging you, forgive me. Tell me I did not destroy the only chance I had at being whole." I stood there, my heart a battlefield. The professional armor I had worn so carefully in the boardroom felt thin and fragile under the onslaught of his raw, unfiltered pain. This was not the man who had coldly dismissed me. This was the man that man had been hiding. A man capable of profound feeling, of devastating regret. The faded thread of our bond pulls between us, resonating with his anguish, pulling at a part of me that had never truly healed. I could still feel the ghost of that searing pain in my chest. I could still hear the echo of his contemptuous words. But looking down at him, at the genuine torment in his eyes, I understood. His rejection had been a catastrophic error, but it had not been malicious. It had been born of a lifetime of conditioning, of a loneliness so entrenched he no longer recognized the real thing when it stood right in front of him. He was waiting for my judgment. His entire world, his very future, hung in the balance of my next words. The power in the room had shifted completely. It was no longer his. It was mine. The silence that followed his confession was a living thing, thick and heavy in the book-lined room. I looked down at Lucian Blackwood, a king on his knees, and felt the tectonic plates of my own reality shift. The raw, unvarnished truth in his eyes was a key, turning in a lock I had believed permanently sealed. The anger, that steadfast shield I had carried for 2 years, did not vanish, but it softened at the edges, making room for something far more dangerous and complex. Understanding. I did not offer him my hand. I did not absolve him. Instead, I turned and walked slowly to the large window, looking out at the city he ruled. The glass was a cold barrier between the warmth of the room and the indifferent world outside. Your apology is heard, I said, my voice quieter than I intended, yet clear in the hushed space. But forgiveness is not a switch to be flipped. It is a path, and you have yet to take a single step on it. I heard his sharp intake of breath behind me. He had expected either immediate rejection or absolution. This middle ground, this uncharted territory, clearly unnerved him. What would you have me do? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. Name it, anything. I will tear down this building if it pleases you. I will renounce my title. I turned to face him. He had risen to his feet, but the deference remained in his posture. I do not want grand, empty gestures, Lucian. I do not want your money or your theatrics. The woman you rejected was not bought with jewels or intimidated by power. Why would the woman I am now be swayed by them? I took a step toward him, my gaze steady. You claimed you saw only a servant, so see me now, not as a CEO you wish to invest in, not as a mate you wish to reclaim. See Elara. Who is she? What does she value? What makes her laugh? You wish to prove you are not the man who judged me by my rank? Then prove it. Court the truth of me, not the idea of me. And so began the most unexpected courtship I could have ever imagined. It was not a courtship of lavish gifts or public declarations. It was a quiet, relentless campaign of genuine curiosity. The next day, a single book arrived at my office. It was not new. It was a first edition of obscure volume of poetry I had loved as a teenager, a book I had once mentioned in passing to a mutual acquaintance years ago. There was no card. He had simply listened, remembered, and found a piece of my history. He began to send emails, not about business, but about articles he had read that made him think of my work, about philosophy, about the future of technology. He asked my opinion, and he truly listened to my responses, engaging in a dialogue of equals. He did not try to impress me with his knowledge. He sought to understand mine. He discovered my favorite tea, a specific blend of chamomile and lavender from a small shop across the city, and a thermos of it, perfectly steeped, was delivered to me every afternoon without fail. One evening, as I was working late, he appeared at my office door. He did not enter uninvited. He simply stood there, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. I have read your entire proposal, he said. The section on heuristic learning algorithms is brilliant, but I have a question about its application in a multi-tiered network. We ended up talking for 2 hours, seated on the floor of my office. Whiteboards covered in complex formulas and passionate debate. It was the most intellectually stimulating evening of my life. He was brilliant, his mind sharp and incisive, and he treated me as his absolute peer. In that moment, I was not an Omega or a Luna prospect. I was a fellow intellect, and he valued my thoughts. The faded thread of our bond began to hum, not with the painful ache of rejection, but with a new, tentative energy. It was a connection being slowly, carefully rewoven with threads of respect and shared passion. I found myself looking forward to his emails, to our conversations. The careful walls I had built around my heart did not crumble, but they developed doors, and I began to open them, one by one. I saw the man beneath the crown, the man who loved ancient history, who was fiercely protective of his pack's well-being, who carried the loneliness of his position like a secret shame. He was not just Lucian Blackwood, alpha billionaire. He was Lucian, a man who had made a catastrophic mistake and was now trying, with every fiber of his being, to atone for it. The past was not forgotten. The hurt was still a faint scar, but with every genuine gesture, every moment of true connection, the future began to feel less like a betrayal of the girl I had been and more like a promise to the woman I had become. He was not claiming me. He was, for the first time, truly seeing me. And in doing so, he was inviting me to see him. The fragile understanding growing between us existed in a delicate bubble, a world we had built of whispered conversations in his library and shared ideas over late-night tea. It was a peace hard-won and precariously held. The outside world, with its ruthless politics and entrenched rivalries, had not forgotten Lucian Blackwood, and it was that world which chose to shatter our fragile peace. The attack was not physical, but it was a declaration of war all the same. It came in the form of a coordinated, vicious assault on the fronts. Silas Thorne, the ambitious and envious alpha of a rival pack, saw Lucian's distraction, his perceived vulnerability, as a prime opportunity. Thorne's pack launched a hostile takeover bid against Blackwood Industries, leveraging dirty tricks, and leaked confidential data to tank the stock price and spook investors. Simultaneously, Thorne's warriors began encroaching on the outermost territories of Lucian's pack lands, a blatant challenge to his authority meant to stretch his resources and humiliate him. The news broke over Lucian like a thunderclap. I saw the change in him instantly. The man who had been slowly opening up, whose eyes had begun to lose their weary shadows, retreated. The alpha mask slammed back into place, but it was tighter, colder, edged with a ferocious anger. He stood in his library, fielding calls from his beta, his financial advisors, his security team. His voice was clipped, his decisions swift and brutal. He was preparing for a war he knew how to fight alone. I watched him, this man who had kneeled before me in vulnerability, now building walls of solitary command. The old Lucian would have never considered another option, but as he turned from the window, his gaze sweeping over a schematic of his corporate network, I saw the flicker of something else. Not doubt, but a realization of a new variable. His eyes met mine. The storm in them was raging, but for a moment, it stilled. He did not see the Omega. He did not see just his mate. He saw the CEO of Aegis Solutions. He saw the architect of the very security protocols his company had been evaluating. He crossed the room in 3 long strides. Thorne is exploiting a weakness in our digital infrastructure, he said, his voice taut. The same vulnerability your proposal identified. My team is good, but they are conventional. They are fighting a conventional war. Thorne is not. He did not order. He did not demand. He asked. It was the greatest testament to the change in him. Elara, I need your mind, not as my mate, as my partner. Can you help me? In that moment, every lingering reservation evaporated. This was not about the past. It was about the future, our future. I nodded, a fierce determination settling in my own heart. Show me the breach. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of intense, focused collaboration. My modest office became our war room. Whiteboards were covered in complex code and network maps. We worked side by side, a seamless unit. I immersed myself in his digital world, my fingers flying across the keyboard, building firewalls, tracing Thorne's digital fingerprints, and patching the leaks with a speed and ingenuity his own team lacked. Lucian handled the physical and political front, but he constantly deferred to my expertise, trusting my judgment implicitly. We were a perfect tandem. My strategic mind anticipated Thorne's next moves in the digital space, while Lucian's knowledge of his enemy's arrogance and his own pack's strengths allowed us to set traps. The climax came during a tense video conference with his board of directors. Thorne's allies on the board were pressuring Lucian to capitulate to sell. Suddenly, my screen lit up with an alert. Thorne was launching his final, decisive cyber attack, a worm designed to cripple their entire financial system. I see it, I said, my voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Lucian did not flinch. He looked away from the skeptical faces of his board and directly at me. Do it. With a single keystroke, I unleashed the countermeasure we had designed together. It was a thing of beautiful, destructive code, a digital wolf that hunted the invader through the network, cornering it and obliterating it at the source. On the screen, the hostile data stream sputtered and died. Simultaneously, Lucian received a call from his beta. Our digital victory had been the signal. Lucian's warriors, now able to focus their full strength, had decisively rooted Thorn's forces from their borders. The dual attack was over. We had won. The boardroom was silent. Lucian ended the call, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across his face for the first time in days. He looked at me, and the look in his eyes was one of pure, unadulterated awe. It was not the look of a man who had been saved. It was the look of a man who had found his equal, his partner in every sense of the word. In the quiet that followed the storm, he walked over to me. He didn't say anything. He simply took my hand, his thumb stroking over my knuckles. The battle had been the crucible. We had been tested, not as Alpha and Omega, but as Lucian and Elara. And we had emerged not just victorious, but united. The last of my walls crumbled away. He had not just fought for me, he had fought with me. And that made all the difference. The victory over Silas Thorn was more than a simple corporate or territorial triumph. It was an exorcism. It purged the last vestiges of the old world order, the one built on blind tradition and hollow power. In the quiet aftermath, a new reality settled over Blackwood Industries and the pack itself, one forged in the fires of shared purpose and mutual respect. Lucian did not simply return to his throne. He began to dismantle it, building something new in its place. His first act as a truly unchallenged alpha was to call a pack gathering. The entire community, from the highest-ranked elders to the most humble omegas, assembled in the grand hall where our story had so painfully begun. The air was thick with anticipation and a faint trace of old anxieties. I stood at the side of the room, no longer in a servant's dress, but in attire that reflected my true status. My head held high. Lucian did not stand above them on a daze. He walked among them. His voice, once used to command and dismiss, now resonated with a new kind of authority, one earned through action and empathy. He spoke of the recent attack, praising the collective strength of the pack. And then he turned his gaze to me. He did not introduce me as his mate. He introduced me as Elara, the visionary behind Aegis Solutions, the strategist who had safeguarded their future. He spoke of my intelligence, my resilience, and my integral role in their victory. He looked every single member in the eye and declared the old caste system abolished. From that day forward, he stated, rank would be earned through merit, loyalty, and contribution to the whole pack, not inherited through bloodline. A stunned silence was followed by a rising wave of applause, first tentative, then thunderous, especially from those who had been relegated to the shadows for generations. He had not just accepted me, he had reshaped his entire world to honor the woman I was. Our mating ceremony was not a spectacle for society pages. It was a private, profound ritual under the full moon, in a secluded grove on his estate, witnessed only by the ancient trees and the stars. There were no titles there, no billionaires or CEOs. There was only Lucian and Elara, two souls who had traveled a long and painful road to find each other. He spoke his vows first, his voice thick with emotion. They were not promises of protection or possession. They were vows of gratitude, of reverence. I vow to honor the strength it took for you to build yourself anew. I vow to stand beside you as your equal partner in all things. I vow to spend every sunrise grateful for your forgiveness and every sunset in awe of your love. When it was my turn, my heart was so full the words came easily. I vow to never forget the woman I became on my own, and to always bring that strength to our union. I vow to be your sanctuary as you are mine. I vow to love the man you are, not the title you hold. As we sealed our vows, the completed bond did not crash over us like a wave. It settled within us, a warm, golden light that filled every part of our beings, healing the last faint scar of the old rejection. It was a homecoming. It was a deep, silent knowing that every wrong turn had somehow led us to this perfect right moment. The connection was more powerful than I could have ever imagined, a constant, humming awareness of his joy, his peace, his love, seamlessly intertwined with my own. Later, we stood together on the balcony of our home, his arms wrapped around me, my back against his chest. The lights of the city he ruled glittered below, but his gaze was not on his kingdom. It was on the moon above, its light bathing us in silver. I spent a lifetime building an empire, Elara, he murmured into my hair, his breath warm against my skin. I thought it was my legacy. I was wrong. He turned me gently to face him, his gray eyes soft and full of a peace I had never seen in them before. You are my legacy. This, he said, placing his hand over my heart, then his own, is my only kingdom. I reached up and touched his face, this man who had been my greatest pain and was now my greatest joy. The rejected Omega and the billionaire Alpha were gone. What remained was simply us, partners, equals, mates. We had written our own story, not on the pages of a society column, but on the fabric of our souls. It was a story that began with a rejection but was defined by a redemption forged in respect and sealed with a love that had proven stronger than pride, stronger than pain, stronger than destiny itself. The end. Simultaneously, Lucian received a call from his beta. Our digital victory had been the signal. Lucian's warriors, now able to focus their full strength, had decisively rooted Thorn's forces from their borders. The dual attack was over. We had won. The boardroom was silent. Lucian ended the call, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across his face for the first time in days. He looked at me, and the look in his eyes was one of pure, unadulterated awe. It was not the look of a man who had been saved. It was the look of a man who had found his equal, his partner in every sense of the word. In the quiet that followed the storm, he walked over to me. He didn't say anything. He simply took my hand, his thumb stroking over my knuckles. The battle had been the crucible. We had been tested, not as Alpha and Omega, but as Lucian and Elara. And we had emerged not just victorious, but united. The last of my walls crumbled away. He had not just fought for me, he had fought with me, and that made all the difference. The victory over Silas Thorn was more than a simple corporate or territorial triumph. It was an exorcism. It purged the last vestiges of the old world order, the one built on blind tradition and hollow power. In the quiet aftermath, a new reality settled over Blackwood Industries and the pack itself, one forged in the fires of shared purpose and mutual respect. Lucian did not simply return to his throne. He began to dismantle it, building something new in its place. His first act as a truly unchallenged alpha was to call a pack gathering. The entire community, from the highest-ranked elders to the most humble omegas, assembled in the grand hall where our story had so painfully begun. The air was thick with anticipation and a faint trace of old anxieties. I stood at the side of the room, no longer in a servant's dress, but in attire that reflected my true status. My head held high. Lucian did not stand above them on a daze. He walked among them. His voice, once used to command and dismiss, now resonated with a new kind of authority, one earned through action and empathy. He spoke of the recent attack, praising the collective strength of the pack. And then he turned his gaze to me. He did not introduce me as his mate. He introduced me as Elara, the visionary behind Aegis Solutions, the strategist who had safeguarded their future. He spoke of my intelligence, my resilience, and my integral role in their victory. He looked every single member in the eye and declared the old caste system abolished. From that day forward, he stated, rank would be earned through merit, loyalty, and contribution to the whole pack, not inherited through bloodline. A stunned silence was followed by a rising wave of applause, first tentative, then thunderous, especially from those who had been relegated to the shadows for generations. He had not just accepted me, he had reshaped his entire world to honor the woman I was. Our mating ceremony was not a spectacle for society pages. It was a private, profound ritual under the full moon, in a secluded grove on his estate, witnessed only by the ancient trees and the stars. There were no titles there, no billionaires or CEOs. There was only Lucian and Elara, two souls who had traveled a long and painful road to find each other. He spoke his vows first, his voice thick with emotion. They were not promises of protection or possession. They were vows of gratitude, of reverence. I vow to honor the strength it took for you to build yourself anew. I vow to stand beside you as your equal partner in all things. I vow to spend every sunrise grateful for your forgiveness, and every sunset in awe of your love. When it was my turn, my heart was so full, the words came easily, I vow to never forget the woman I became on my own, and to always bring that strength to our union. I vow to be your sanctuary as you are mine. I vow to love the man you are, not the title you hold. As we sealed our vows, the completed bond did not crash over us like a wave. It settled within us, a warm, golden light that filled every part of our beings, healing the last faint scar of the old rejection. It was a homecoming. It was a deep, silent knowing that every wrong turn had somehow led us to this perfect right moment. The connection was more powerful than I could have ever imagined, a constant, humming awareness of his joy, his peace, his love, seamlessly intertwined with my own. Later, we stood together on the balcony of our home, his arms wrapped around me, my back against his chest. The lights of the city he ruled glittered below, but his gaze was not on his kingdom. It was on the moon above, its light bathing us in silver. I spent a lifetime building an empire, Elara, he murmured into my hair, his breath warm against my skin. I thought it was my legacy. I was wrong. He turned me gently to face him, his gray eyes soft and full of a peace I had never seen in them before. You are my legacy. This, he said, placing his hand over my heart, then his own, is my only kingdom. I reached up and touched his face, this man who had been my greatest pain and was now my greatest joy. The rejected Omega and the billionaire Alpha were gone. What remained was simply us, partners, equals, mates. We had written our own story, not on the pages of a society column, but on the fabric of our souls. It was a story that began with a rejection, but was defined by a redemption forged in respect and sealed with a love that had proven stronger than pride, stronger than pain, stronger than destiny itself. The end.